Hello, communities on Boosty and Patreon. First news update for today, for 29th of June, exclusively for our Patreon and Boosty communities. Although first 10-15 minutes probably of this program probably will be published on YouTube and Rumble channels of mine as an advertising. Hopefully, more members of our bigger community will decide to support this independent media project and will join our communities either on Patreon or Booster will be great support, of course. And well, without further delay, let's go through some news. It is 10 to 9 now in the morning, Moscow time, and of course, from now to 3 p.m. when I will launch a live stream on YouTube and Rumble with the main news update. There are going to be more updates on major developments. So live stream will be bigger, but I already have bookmarked quite a number of news for this moment, and I hope you will find this program informative and interesting. And first and foremost, I want to start with quite a big interview that Putin gave to Pavel Zarubin, Russian journalist, and he went through some major topics during the conversation with Zarubin. And let's go through some key points here. Kommersant, a newspaper, published an article about it, and so let's go through this article here. Following a meeting on the fuel situation, Vladimir Putin answered the questions from Westy journalist Pavel Zarubin. President discussed how critical the Ukrainian armed forces strikes are for Russian energy, what new proposals the Ukrainian negotiating teams has made, what their spirit of anchorage is, and the current situation along the line of contact between Russian armed forces and the Kyiv regime's forces. Kommersant selected some key points from Russian President, key remarks, and okay, let's go one by one. On Ukrainian armed forces strikes on infrastructure, Russian President Vladimir Putin went to say that Ukrainian attacks on critical infrastructure, particularly energy sector, are creating problems. So Russian President is acknowledging that there is certain issues in this regard. He also said there is a shortage due to Ukrainian armed forces strikes, but it is not critical. According to Russian president, some people might disagree with me with this statement of Russian president, especially in regions that are experiencing significant difficulties with logistics, with fuel supply. But Russian president said that it's not critical. He also stated that it is necessary to increase their production and supply of air defense systems to deal with these long-range incoming attacks. And well, even though this makes sense, obviously, these statements are more air defense systems are needed, but at the same time, everyone understands very clear that vast majority of drones and missiles that Kyiv regime is formerly Kyiv regime, in reality NATO countries basically, are launching to strike deep into Russian territory are built in NATO countries, in those NATO countries, and the only way you can effectively deal with the situation to decrease these long-range attacks is to restore the deterrent with the collective West, so that these NATO countries will no longer provide Kyiv regime, yet again formerly Kyiv regime, with this long-range means of strike. Deterrent needs to be restored. That should be priority. But yet again, that's my personal take on that. Russian president is more focused on increase in supply of air defense systems. Okay. He also went to say that to cover the energy deficit, imports will be established, among other things. Also logical in this particular case, logical decision, because there is not much options really left. I spoke about possible increase, significant increase of imports of petroleum products from neighboring countries, and that's exactly what is going to happen. While Russian oil refineries, significant number of Russian oil refineries are damaged and are working on restoration to restore their production due to these long-range attacks. Also, Russian president said all critical infrastructure facilities damaged by Ukrainian armed forces are being quickly restored. Questionable statement, of course, because they are energy infrastructure that can be restored relatively easily, but they are energy infrastructure that will take has suffered such a significant damage that it will take many months, if not more than a year, to be restored. And in Russian segment of internet, I have seen reports about quite a few oil refineries that will need more than 6 months to restore production, including Moscow's oil refinery that was targeted relatively recently. Also, dear friends, Russian president went to say that Crimea's fuel needs will be met. There is currently a supply of several days worth of fuel on the peninsula. The task of supplying Crimea with the energy will be resolved. Task of supplying Crimea with energy will be resolved. We will increase fuel deliveries by land and sea. This is what Russian president is saying, but unfortunately, means of delivery, highways on the land bridge between Crimea and mainland Russia, also ferry transportation means are experiencing some difficulties due to this long-range attacks. So it's easier to say than do, but Russian president is optimistic. Russian president Vladimir Putin is optimistic in this regard. Okay, we will see. Ukrainian armed forces are carrying out strikes with the aim to create a split in Russian society and halting the advance of the Russian armed forces along the lines of conflict. Again, that's what Russian president thinks, but I have to disagree with these statements. These long-range attacks on Russian Federation is not creating split inside the society. If anything, society is more united, but same time more angry and frustrated, because everyone understands. Everyone who pays any attention to these developments understands that the only way we can most effectively deal with the situation is to restore the deterrent with the collective West, with NATO member states that are directly involved in these long-range attacks on Russian Federation. Absent of deterrent only deteriorates situation. And when it comes to advance of Russian armed forces, on most of the directions, these shortages of fuel will not have, or issues with logistics probably will have no impact on the battlefield there, but when it comes to Zaporozhye sector, when it comes to Kherson sector, this might have an impact. And nowadays, number of sources even are speculating that Kyiv regime might launch a sectoral scale offensive operation on either of these directions, Kherson or Zaporozhye, or maybe even try to conduct a landing operation on the Crimean Peninsula. So something to keep in mind. Also, Russian president stated we will not give the Ukrainian armed forces a chance to impose their terms on negotiations. Okay, whatever that means. On the advancement of the Russian armed forces, Putin stated that the main task of the Russian armed forces is to completely liberate Donbass and Novorossiya. The Russian armed forces broke through three-tier defense lines in their zone of center group of forces. It is possible that Ukrainian armed forces will attempt to conduct diversionary operations. The Russian armed forces have come close to village of Dobropolye in the DPR, but the Ukrainian armed forces have not prepared their defense lines. Beyond it, Russian army is 10.5 kilometers from Sumy. Russian goal in the Sumy region is to create a secure zone. There are about 2 kilometers left until their final encirclement of their Kiev regime's forces near the Staraya Skol. Russian troops are 8 to 9 kilometers away from Slavyansk. According to Putin, 96% of Konstantinovka in the DPR is under control of the Russian military. In Liman, in Krasny Liman, in the DPR, 149 buildings out of 11,000 remain to be cleared from hostile forces. So Liman is also practically fully liberated, just a little bit, and probably we'll hear statements about liberation of this city. Also, Russian president stated that Russian armed forces are advancing daily in the Zaporozhye region on a broad front. Sometimes Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrate territories occupied by Russian troops, but they are quickly eliminated. Some people might argue with this. On the eastern flank of Zaporozhye sector, Russian troops are advancing, actually. There are a lot of confirmations of that, but when it comes to most western flank of Zaporozhye sector, situation is a bit different. And Kiev regime with their heavy losses, but nevertheless is managing to reclaim some of their territories that used to be controlled by Russian forces. But yet again, Putin definitely has a point while saying that, yes, they might infiltrate territory, but they are then quickly losing it once they run out of steam. They have not enough manpower on the ground to hold lines, right? And this is factual. Although to say that Russian troops are advancing all along the front line in Zaporozhye sector is a bit exaggeration. Advance is happening on eastern and central flanks, of the sector, but western flank, its situation is a bit more complicated. Also, Russian president stated that Ukraine will pay for its crimes in the Kursk region with the loss of territory needed for the security zone, and this is also interesting. I guess Putin is hinting there that liberated territories in Sumy and Kharkov region, potentially in Chernigov region, will remain under the Russian control. Maybe that's what is going to happen. Although who knows? About contacts with the Ukrainian side or Kyiv regime, the Russian authorities are maintaining negotiating contacts with Ukraine, and it has new proposals. One of Ukraine's proposals is to mutually cease deep-seated strikes. Russian retaliatory strikes deep into Ukraine are far more powerful and damaging. Putin says Ukraine proposed conducting military operations only in the DPR, LPR, Kherson, and Zaporozhye region in order to redeploy units there, which would be salvation for Kiev. I guess Zelensky's regime, with advice of its NATO backers, come up with proposal to limit the military operations only by these 4 regions, which makes no sense really. Say the Kiev regime is not part of Russia's plans. Okay, then why Russian President Vladimir Putin is not authorizing to eliminate leadership of Kiev regime? Right, makes no sense, isn't it? So why Russian president did not authorize Russian security services and militaries to take action and eliminate leadership of this Western-backed terrorist regime in Ukraine? Why? But anyways, Zarubin would not ask these questions, right? Zarubin is not really a journalist, he's a freaking propagandist, right? And so we should keep that in mind too. About agreements in Anchorage, Putin went to say that in Anchorage possibilities for ending the Ukrainian conflict and compromises were discussed, but no one signed anything. The spirit, Putin basically acknowledged that there was no agreements. There was no agreement, at least nothing was signed on a paper. The spirit of Anchorage was not formally documented. He says American negotiators in Anchorage asked Russia to compromise. Moscow agreed to these agreements. But yet again, Moscow agreed to compromise. Putin thought, I guess, that they have agreement in place, but just other day, Marco Rubio, head of U.S. State Department, said it clearly that there was just proposals in Anchorage, nothing serious, no agreements. So he was a bit frustrated why everybody is talking about or asking him about Anchorage. He clearly does not care. Trump does not care, and nobody cares in U.S. But Russian president does, and his team. I mean, they think Anchorage was much more serious than American side views this, right? And you can feel, you can see this attitude in the statements that Russian officials are making. And Putin continues, even though Marco Rubio was very clear that there was no agreements, there was nothing, right? Let's not waste time on this topic. But Russian president continues to talk about this. Russia is expecting the arrival of American negotiators after the end of the hot phase of events surrounding Iran. As I said, the Russian president clearly lives in a different universe, and the US leadership is in different universe, because one is saying that this Anchorage is freaking nonsense, don't bother me about this stuff, I don't care. While other side says, well, Anchorage is a serious stuff, maybe there was no documents, but well, negotiation is going to come and we're going to still talk about stuff. Okay. Truly nonsensical stuff there, but it is what it is. Russia is ready to continue discussions with the United States on all modalities that were discussed in Anchorage. As I said, man, Putin is still talks about Anchorage. It's sad, man. It's sad to see this decline in sharpness, in some sense. Excuse me, freaking phones, man. When I record the update, that's exactly when all these noises gonna come up. Oh, goodness me, man. A few more statements from Putin about the West. West is striving for Russia's strategic defeat, and no one has officially removed these theses from their agenda. So why he is talking then with the Americans? Why he is still this polite towards Trump and his administration? Are they not part of the West? Or are they? I don't know. Putin also says, I was surprised to read European leaders' greetings regarding the use of Ukrainian drones, given the attacks on Starobelsk College. Okay, I mean, honestly, it is becoming more and more difficult to understand what Putin is talking about. On one sentence, he's saying that Western ruling class is all about achieving strategical defeat of Russia, destroying Russia. And on other settlement, he is expressing frustration that how come that none of these Western elites express condolences or say anything about this tragedy that occurred in Starobelsk when college was targeted. They just don't care, man. If you understand that they are all about destroying Russia, then in next sentence, how you can complain that they are not acting humanely towards Russia? Of course, they would not. Why you expect that they will act humanely? Who tell you that Western elites have any decency, dignity, or humanity? Why Putin is this misinformed about Western elites? Why he thinks Western elites are good people? and something good should be expected from them, like natural human condolences and sorrow due to tragedy that occurred in Starobelsk when EU regime with assistance of NATO countries targeted college and killed dozens of students, injuring even more. I don't know. Putin also said, I doubt that European leaders were able to influence Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. He is responding on these statements that during the recent G7 summit in Europe, in Switzerland, that was, isn't it? European countries did manage to influence the Trump, who then made a U-turn on topic of Ukraine and now fully on board again to lead this war against Russia. And Putin is saying that he don't think European leaders were able to influence Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. If he means that Trump was always on board with this war and he was just messing around, okay, that will make sense. But if he wants to say that Trump actually not on the border with the European elites, Trump don't want prolongation of this war, he wants the escalation, then he's mistaken. And the European leaders would not be able to influence him, then he is just mistaken. Clearly. Putin also said Russia now knows for sure that Ukraine and the West had no intention of implementing the Minsk agreements only now. I knew it straight away that it was a deception. When Putin was engaged in those negotiations, I knew it was deception and I was correct. But I mean, thanks God, after so many years, Putin finally realized that Minsk agreements were deception and lie. Yeah, it was. Anchorage is also a deception, but I guess Putin will need another 10 years to realize that Anchorage is also a deception. About Belarus, Putin stated that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is not panicking over Vladimir Zelensky's shouts. Russia is grateful to Lukashenko for his efforts on the humanitarian track in the Ukrainian direction, including the exchange of prisoners. Lukashenko is ready to support in every possible way the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine by peaceful means. That's key points from Putin's statements during that interview with the so-called journalist Zarubin, Kremlin propagandist, by the way, that Zarubin is, right? Anything but journalist. But anyways, I don't really care about that term. Statements of Putin definitely leaves more questions than give us answers. That's obvious. That's obvious and very unfortunate, but that's what we have. That's what we have.